The rainy season in the capital Jakarta this month has caused multiple floods. A recently launched website enables Jakarta's citizens to share information in order to avoid flooded areas. I met one of the co-directors of petajakarta.org, Etienne Turpin, to talk more about the innovation. So can you tell us a little bit more about petajakarta.org, how it will benefit Jakartans during the flood?
Yes, petajakarta.org is a project that is a collaboration between the Smart Infrastructure Facility out of Australia, where I work, BPBD DKI Jakarta, the Jakarta Emergency Management Agency, and Twitter Incorporated. And so, working together, we've designed a free and open source software that collects all of the tweets in Jakarta about Banjir and then freely displays them in a navigational map so that you can find your way through the city and avoid the risks of flood. So ideally, the system is working as a peer-to-peer sharing. So I can tell you, careful, watch out for this. You can see my comments on the map. But also the government can use that to improve their response time, their understanding of situational context information about floods, unexpected events, and their routing of their response.
Okay, so based on your study here for the past 18 months, do you think that people who live in the flood area can live reasonably in the future, though?
Well, I mean, a lot of people in Jakarta live actually in a flood area. As we know, 40% of the city is below sea level, and there are 13 rivers passing through Jakarta. So as a result of weather intensification because of climate change and the infrastructure failures in the city, there is a high risk for all of the residents to be exposed to Banjir.
Right.
So I think what's absolutely imperative is that we develop systems to allow citizens to participate in the management of those things. We cannot just expect the government to know where all of the problems are and exactly what to do. But within the greater Jakarta area, there are 28 million people with cell phones. And if we can link those cell phones as sensors, people are much smarter than a CCTV camera. They know where the incident is. They can turn 360 degrees. They can zoom in, right? If we can help the citizens use their sensors to link that information, then we have a much better chance of responding to Banjir, reducing its risks, and recovering from it effectively.
But that only happens if the IT infrastructure of the city is strong enough, right? Do you have any obstacles, though, with this, with the infrastructure, the technology?
The main obstacle with respect to the infrastructure is that large construction projects can be paid for in cash. Therefore, large construction projects tend to attract high amounts of corruption. There's a lot of difficulty in tracking the spending. Were they built correctly? Have they been updated and maintained the way they should be? And so there is a lot of skepticism about massive infrastructure expenditures by banks and by city governments and by citizens. So we think that there may be other ways in addition to infrastructure improvements and maintenance, which is definitely required. Anyone who has been around Jakarta knows that the infrastructure could use a maintenance budget. But I think the response to problems like climate change and Banjir, as it becomes more and more complicated, also mean that we need to network the city and network the citizens to be able to respond and distribute that response throughout the city more effectively. And that requires less infrastructure, traditional infrastructure spending, than smarter infrastructure decisions, better IT support, and networking the knowledge to produce an ability to respond.
Okay, so looking at the facts, on the ground right now, and then also with what you said about the climate change, and then also with that we are 40% of the city is currently below sea level. Realistically, what will the city look like in, say, like 50 or 100 years to come?
In 50 or 100 years, I think Jakarta will have, I hope, triumphed over some of these issues. And the way that that will happen is that we need to anticipate that with climate change, every energy analyst agrees, the cost of energy continues to increase. So the way that we deal with climate change And Indonesia has 17,000 islands and a rising sea. This is a serious test for how can we anticipate climate change. The key is that we do not increase our dependency on expensive energy as a solution. So, can we create a more sustainable, restorative approach? And to me, that approach is totally possible. 50 years before Central Park was built in New York, no one could have imagined that that would be the most valuable property in Manhattan. But by taking an area that was previously disregarded, like the Chiliwang watershed, and turning it into a conservation area where people would want to go and want to get outside, they produced the greatest property value in all of Manhattan. What if we did to the Chiliwang what was done to Central Park in the 19th century?
I would like to see that Chiliwang National Park, or like Central Park in New York. Well, last week, the Economic Intelligence Unit released a report naming Jakarta as one of the worst cities in the world, and a lot of factors contributing to the title. One of them is infrastructure and also crime rates. Yeah. Do you think that floods also play a big role?
I think that the relationship between the flooding and the infrastructure needs to be thought in the reverse. The floods don't weaken the infrastructure, although of course they're demanding on infrastructure. But that the infrastructure, the failure for systematic planning, integrated assessments, actual evidence-based decision-making to determine what needs to be fixed. If we were using these approaches to infrastructure investment, then the infrastructure would be improving to fix the situation with Banjir. But right now, we have the opposite. We have the Banjir comes, and the government uses it as a way to announce big infrastructure projects that may or may not solve that problem. I definitely think that there is an important foresight within the government, but I want to say that they are working so hard to address the day-to-day problems within the city, to manage the traffic, to manage the waste, to manage the Banjir, that in making sure the city is there for you tomorrow morning, right, they don't have a lot of extra time to be having a long-range plan. And I think that long-range planning and that image of what is Jakarta in 50 years, like you ask, or 100 years, what is the Jakarta that's more livable in 100 years than it is now, requires all of the citizens of Jakarta to make their livability known.
If you want to share news about flooding in Jakarta via petajakarta.org, you can tweet #Banjir2 at PetaJKT.